Welcome to AP Biology. Today we're going to be talking about the speed of speciation and the speed of evolution. So speciation means that you're forming or new species are being formed. And so there are two basic models. There's the gradualism model and the punctuated equilibrium model. And so there's fossil evidence for both of these. So this is really not an either or question. It's just that we see evidence for both of these models happening in nature. And so this is the gradualism model, and it suggests that species evolve slowly. So you have some ancestral species right here, and there are very, very small changes over time, and eventually you end up with two different species. They can't mate and reproduce with each other, and that's due to the accumulation of many, many small changes over time. So maybe there's a very, very slight selective pressure on one group compared to another, a difference. Maybe they live in a slightly, different place, something like that. Or maybe it's just that the environment is changing very slightly, and these live in a slightly, different place. Maybe they live more on the top of trees, or these live in the bottom of trees, or they live in slightly different areas. And there's these small changes over time. And so there is evidence for this where we see lots and lots of transition species between the initial fossil that we're looking at and the final, what we have now. The punctuated equilibrium model suggests that species remain pretty much unchanged for a whole lot of their existence, and then sometimes you have these um, new fossils in the strata, in the fossil record, that seem to pop up pretty quickly, and then they are pretty much unchanged for long, long periods of time. So this would suggest that maybe there was some really strong selective pressure for just a little bit of time, or maybe that the environment changed very quickly and then stayed pretty stable. So these both models have evidence in the fossil record for them, so it's really not one or the other. They both probably happen, and probably everything in between as well. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is just that evolution. Sometimes students think that evolution happens very, very, very slowly all the time, and you could never see it in your lifetime. But actually, there are many examples that you can see in your lifetime. And one example is when in bacteria. So if you have a really strong selective pressure and a generation time that's really fast, like with bacteria, as fast as every 30 minutes, then you can see evolution happening in your own lifetime. So let's say, for example, that you have strep throat. And so these colors are representing the resistance that the strep bacteria in your throat have, the resistance they have to some antibiotic. So anti means against and bio means life. So this sounds like it's against life, but really what it means is it's against bacterial life, right? So resistance means that the bacteria are resistant to the medicine. So let's say you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you, let's say, I don't know, amoxicillin. And so you take your antibiotic, you take your amoxicillin, and it kills off the ones that are not very resistant, the ones that are susceptible to getting killed by amoxicillin. So these are the bacteria that are getting killed off. And after the first day, let's say, you've killed off these. But the others are a little bit more resistant. They have slightly different DNA, some mutation, some variation it keeps them alive. And if you took your antibiotic for all 10 days, you'd probably kill them all off. But let's say you don't. Let's say you only take it for a day, and these are the bacteria that are left. And you stop taking that antibiotic, well, these are the ones that are surviving and reproducing, and so eventually you get this population with pretty much all resistant bacteria. And if you start taking your amoxicillin then, because you're feeling bad again, it might not work anymore. So that's not great. Here's just another way to picture it. The yellow ones are the susceptible bacteria, the red ones are the resistant ones. So right here and here. And so you take your antibiotics and you kill off almost all the yellow ones, and this is what you're left. And then they survive and reproduce if you don't take your antibiotics. And that's what you've got after not too long. Another kind of horrible thing that can happen is, let's say you've got these bacteria, and there's their DNA, right? And maybe they have a plasmid, and that plasmid is what gives them resistance to the amoxicillin. And now you've got the amoxicillin resistant bacteria, so that's a sad thing. And so maybe the doctor gives you some other medicine, maybe streptomycin, and maybe that kills off the bacteria. Yay! But let's say instead you interact with someone else first. Maybe you go to the hospital and you meet them, and they have bacteria too, and they're coughing and breathing the same air as you are. and maybe they have a plasmid that gives them its resistance to streptomycin. And maybe when you breathe in the air that they were breathing, maybe you got some of these bacteria into you, and maybe they form this thing called a sex pili and sex pilus, and maybe that plasmid comes into your bacteria, and now your bacteria is resistant to both. And so you take the streptomycin, but you've got this bacteria that can survive. And so this is the way you get these superbugs that are resistant to many different antibiotics. Very, very bad news. Okay, so antibiotics are what we would say is a strong selective pressure for bacteria, meaning it selects out and kills off the ones that are susceptible, allowing the resistant ones to continue to live. Another example would be with pesticides. Let's say you're a farmer and you've got this cropland and you're growing some kind of food, and the bugs are eating a whole lot of it, and so you spray with your insecticide, and it kills off most of them. See, the poor bugs are dead, but this one survives, and it finds another one and mates, and eventually you've got a whole bunch of resistant bugs. So there was some, first of all, you have to have some naturally occurring variation. If there's nobody who's resistant to that pesticide, then they would all die. But there has to be somebody with this naturally occurring variation, this good mutation for them. And then the insecticide kills maybe 99% of the bugs, but the bugs with the resistance mutation or the different gene survive and have babies, and now the population's different. That is evolution. Here's HIV drug resistance, and this is showing the amount of HIV resistance in different patients. And so if you just follow this first patient here, in the beginning, when they went into the doctors on day 0, they had no resistant HIV. They had all wild type HIV in them. And then you gave them an antiviral drug, and it kills off almost like 99.99% of the viruses in them. But it doesn't take too long for those resistant viruses to reproduce. And eventually, after it looks like about 2.5 weeks or so, eventually this patient has no more wild type, almost no wild type HIV in them, but they have a bunch of HIV that are resistant to whatever drug you gave them. And you'll see a similar thing with patient 2 and patient 3.